Hello and thank you. Hello and welcome to today's episode of AI Tafakkur. I'm your host, Sador Beck, project manager of AI Tafakkur. I'm thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, someone whose work has shaped how we understand democracy, global governance, and especially digital democracy of USA. Joining us today is Professor Larry Diamond, a senior fellow at Hoover Institution and Freeman Spogel Institution at Stanford University. He is also the founding of co-editor of Journal of Democracy and has written extensively about the challenges and opportunities facing democratic societies today. Nice to meet you, Professor. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Nice to be with you.
Dear Professor, by now I know you have talked a lot about the democracy of USA on podcasts, on masterclass. Today, I'm going to discuss a little unusual topic that you may have not been questioned a lot about. Before we start, I'm going to ask one little question. How would you characterize current state of democracy in Central Asia today?
Well, as you probably know, I'm not an expert on the politics of Central Asia. I think none of the Central Asian countries, to my knowledge or awareness, are democracies. That is, they can't choose and replace their leaders in fully free and fair elections. But they're at different points of progress or retreat from that goal. I think if you look at recent history or the longer arc of history in a country like Kyrgyzstan or post-Nazarbayev, Kazakhstan, you see a desire for the elements of democracy, of competition, political openness, freedom, uh, and restraint of state power. I think with the changes you've experienced in Uzbekistan, without which you wouldn't be able to do this discussion that we're having online, it's opened up new possibilities there, and I applaud you for taking advantage of those opportunities and trying to facilitate and expand them and use the space that's been open to uh, expand understanding and awareness. Often the journey to democracy is not a sudden kind of orange revolution type thing. It moves in incremental steps. So, I hope you will keep moving along that pathway.
Of course we do. Thank you. Many argue that Central Asian countries still maintain a kind of political and ideological reliance on Russia, just like during the Soviet Union era. How accurate do you think that is?
Well, again, you're asking me to make an analytic judgment about a part of the world that, I don't know as well or follow as closely as other parts of the world. But I think most people with even a vague awareness of global affairs and who've even slightly been following the trajectory of the former Soviet states since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991 see the obvious that Russia wants to reconstruct its empire. That's what the war on Ukraine is about. That's what the Russian invasion of Georgia was about. That's what the Russian subversion of Georgian democracy has been about. And that's what Russia's use of what we call sharp power, which we can talk about, the power to penetrate other political systems, not only with ideology, but with money, covert
Yes.
influence, and propaganda. That's what it's been about in Central Asia. And so Russia sees itself as a natural and rightful imperial power with the destiny and the right to control probably most, if not all, of former Soviet space. And I think that the peoples of the other former Soviet republics outside of Russia should have the right to determine their own destiny.
Of
In the
course.
United States, we're not asking for or expecting hostility, just, genuine autonomy and independence.
Of course, of course. What do you think? Germany restored its power after World War One very soon. Why Central Asian countries are finding it difficult to build strong democracy after building their independence from Soviet Union? Why is it taking too long?
Well, it always helps in building a democracy to have been a democracy. And the longer that a country has experienced authoritarian rule, the more challenging it is to lay the cultural, social, civic, and institutional foundations of democracy. I don't want to mischaracterize or misrepresent the pre-Soviet history of the Central Asian republics. I don't know enough about the long arc of history and the diverse political traditions of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and so on, to be able to say they've never had any experience with democracy. Often you find in countries like this, if you go back, far enough in time, maybe not democracy in its full form, but elements of representation and elements of restraint of power. And you can even find this in political systems that were very fragmented at the local level, or that had some restraints on hereditary power of monarchs and so on. But leaving that aside, as the Soviet Union was constructed with its all-encompassing totalitarian features, it leaves after the collapse what social scientists call a flattened civic landscape. You didn't have in any of these countries, a tradition of multiple political parties or of independent civil society organizations or independent media or independent intellectual enterprises and universities and efforts at inquiry, understanding, research, teaching, and conveying of knowledge and independent ideas in the form, for example, that you're doing with your initiative and in the form of a conversation we're having right now. None of this existed or could have existed at that time. So if you're starting with a flattened social, civic, political, civic landscape, a flattened economic landscape because of the nature of communist system and state socialism, it takes a long time to build these things. And then if you lay on top of that flattened landscape 20 or 30 years of personalistic dictatorship uh, after communism, a kind of neo-communism or neo-Stalinist republic of fear, that doesn't help either. So it's a very complex legacy to overcome. And it takes a lot of initiative, a lot of education, a lot of building of independent institutions and networks, and the creation of ties between say, Uzbek civil society, Uzbek educational systems, Uzbek companies, uh, and diverse other partners, not just partners in Russia, right? If all the means of communication, conversation, ideology, trade run from Central Asia to Russia rather than in a diverse multiplicity of ways, that makes it harder too. So again, I think if you look at the Central Asian republics honestly and not through the lens of great power competition, it's not really realistic probably to expect that they can live and develop and prosper and be stable in intense hostility to Russia. But what you would hope for is, the gradual emergence of autonomy, multiplicity of ties, balance of power, and civic, political, economic, social pluralism. If the Central Asian republics are looking for a model to turn to, I think the more realistic and useful model and the country to really try and cultivate ties with is not so much like the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, or the former Warsaw Pact states, but Mongolia, which, Mongolia is a country with an interesting history. It was, really became a kind of Soviet satellite state, never part of the Soviet Union, but heavily dominated by it. And the kind of nomadic culture and, some of the traditions, I think, bear some similarities to parts of Central Asia. And it's a country completely surrounded by Russia and China. How'd you like to have that as your geographic fate? But they managed through extraordinary leadership and a lot of civic mobilization and a way of kind of balancing off Russia and China and the West, particularly the United States, as a third external actor to nurture along a political system that achieved a pretty decent level of democracy. So I think there are, I would really encourage close interaction with and close study of the experience of Mongolia to figure out how a country that had been a kind of Soviet republic, Soviet satellite, Russian imperial terrain could kind of nudge its way out of that orbit and toward democratic autonomy.
Of course, of course. But you know, I'm also very impressed by the uh, democratic improvements in Mongolia. But what do you think, from the experience of you from digital democracy, what kind of digital initiatives we need in Central Asia? You can also model USA or other countries, and you can suggest some initiatives to implement from these countries to Central Asia.
Well, you have to be careful when you talk about digital politics because it's a double-edged sword. Uh, in the period between kind of 2007 and 2010, I was building a program at Stanford University, and then I edited a book entitled Liberation Technology. And we saw social media platforms like Facebook, and we saw digital tools of communication and mobilization as tools for liberation, for democracy, for the autonomous mobilization of independent media and independent organization, including the independent organization that could mobilize people in the streets to protest using platforms like Facebook, and now, of course, you have Instagram and so many others. But it was only a short period of time, another few years, before authoritarian states learned how to preempt and manage and pervert and utilize these digital tools for their own malign purposes. And those purposes include, number one, flooding the zone of information with their propaganda and disinformation. And so polluting the information environment with false news and fear and distrust and information that would manipulate politics and society toward their objectives in Russia, in China, whatever. Number two, you have the problem of surveillance and the danger that people face when they open their mobile phones and everything they say in conversations or write on social media or every place they go uh, might be captured and tracked by authoritarian actors, authoritarian governments, using very powerful tracking software. This remains an acute problem to this moment, and civil society actors need to be very alert to this and very up to date on the methods of protecting themselves, both by finding ways to insulate their mobile phones from the networks of surveillance, which means they're not really available to use, but uh, sometimes you're moving in a way where it's too dangerous to be tracked. And so, there are various simple pieces of equipment like RFI, insulation wallets that it's like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak, can remove you from surveillance. There's software you can download that will encrypt all your communications. So civil society has to get smart about using technology in ways that will at least increase their levels of protection and make it more difficult for malign actors, both foreign actors and authoritarian actors within their own society, to surveil them and disrupt their democratic initiatives and put them at risk. You have the problem of disinformation now being empowered and supercharged by artificial intelligence. So we're starting to get, not only fake news, fake information, but fake videos where AI can, be mobilized to capture someone's voice, someone's face, and having them say things they didn't say. And it's can be challenging to demonstrate that uh, it's a fake video, and there's a whole realm of digital uh, companies and digital initiatives that are working to try and detect deep fakes and authoritatively identify and remove them. You have the phenomenon of TikTok, and which I hope none of you are on. If any of you are on, you should get off it as soon as possible, because if you're using TikTok, you're handing over all your data to the Chinese Communist Party state. You may not be handing it over immediately right now, but China is a neo-totalitarian state which does not recognize any boundary between the private sector and the party state, and which has made it clear that its digital companies have a legal obligation to hand over any data that's requested. And we don't know how automatic the transmission of user data from TikTok to the party state and its supercomputers may be. But anyone using TikTok is put at risk by that. And so you have to think about what, of course, all or almost all social media communication platforms are capturing and monetizing people's data and using them to build, AI platforms and so on. But if you ask yourself, would you rather have your data captured by a private company that's detached from politics or by an authoritarian state? I think the answer should be obvious. And beyond that, the answer should be that we should try and minimize the capture of our data and pursue regulations that limit the ability of companies to capture our data without our permission. Um, we have new ways that digital tools can be used to improve the quality of governance and the ability of citizens to communicate with their elected representatives. And this can make a difference at the local level in terms of the provision of services. So there's a whole realm of digital life now that comes under the phrase e-government, electronic government, and the efficient communication of citizens with the government in the pursuit of services or the registering of complaints, and the ability of government to communicate with citizens, not in perverse and authoritarian ways, but in necessary ways. Maybe there's been a natural disaster, and government in a particular area needs to communicate with citizens on, how to evade it or take shelter or how to locate family members who've been lost. So there are all these functions as well. Social media and more generally digital tools, they're just tools. You pick up a hammer and it can build a house and it can also bludgeon someone to death. So a tool, has in itself, unless it's a gun or a tool that can only be used for destruction. But many tools can be used for good or ill, for creation or destruction, for constructive and humanitarian purposes, or for malign, corrupt, criminal, and authoritarian purposes. They are what we make of them, and we need to learn how to use them, how to control them, and how to work with our governments to ensure that the bad purposes are constrained and that civil society has transparency over how they're being utilized, and that the good purposes are enabled and elevated and facilitated. And of course, with that goes the need, maybe you're all involved in this, to educate citizens, educate young people and others in the effective and proper use of these digital tools. Some of this may involve very technical stuff, including the ability to code and adapt these tools to your own societal needs. And some of them just involve intelligent and responsible use, including how to use social media in such a way that you don't take at face value everything you read. But, when a claim is being made, you can step outside the pillar of information that's flowing to you and search around and check the sources and see if the sources actually exist. Are they real? and are they responsible, and what are alternative sources of information saying? So, in digital life, there's a massive need for education and and innovation in a more responsible way.
Yes, yes, thank you. But when I hear your opinion, two ideas came to my mind. First one is educating people to avoid political bias, and the second one, restricting bias on social media. For example, TikTok has been restricted in Uzbekistan 2 years before. Which way is better, do you think? On which way we can go further? Educating people to avoid bias or restricting it directly?
Well, I think that it's better in the quest for freedom and democracy to act with restraint in restricting or censoring public access to platforms, digital platforms, and digital sources. There should be a very high threshold of concern and evidence in order to ban a digital platform or a source of information. And even if you ban it, if people have the proper or necessary tools, they can
Depends.
circumvent the ban, right? If they have
Yes,
the
yes.
circumvention tools. But I think there are some tools that are so malign and dangerous that even if you make them more difficult for citizens to use them and stigmatize the use of it, it's still a positive thing. And that's why I think a lot of countries, including the United States, should ban TikTok, and more of them are doing so. Um, but otherwise, my bias is to let information flow and to try and educate citizens to be more questioning and to seek out multiple sources of information, not just to rely on one source, but to read a diversity of sources and become critical thinkers. I mean, democracy is built in a variety of ways, but one of the ways that democracy is built is by building critical, thoughtful, questioning citizens who don't take everything at face value, but who take the initiative to seek out multiple sources of information, to question received information, and to debate and have respect for diverse points of view.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Actually, your opinions were really amazing. Here in Uzbekistan, we learn about politics and democracy on a shallow level, but it would be really interesting for our program, for those who are learning from our program, to learn about your view from one professor, from one expert who's outside our country, outside our nation. It was really informative. Thank you for meeting an
Well,
amazing
I,
conversation.
I have 20 lectures on democratic development sitting on a YouTube channel. You're welcome to translate them into Uzbek if you want to.
Really?
Yeah.
How many hours are there totally?
Well, each lecture is about 80 minutes, but each lecture is broken up into like 4 or 5 segments. So there are 20 lectures, and each of them have 4 or 5 segments of 10, 12, 14 minutes.
Okay.
Anyway, I can send you the list. You can look at them. You can do what you want with them. I consider them a public good. So if people want to just show them as is or translate them and select a few pieces of them and show them, you can do whatever you want with them.
Of course, we have a big team. Of course, we can manage it. We are going to really work on it. Thank you for the conversation. If you have any suggestions or questions, we are very open before ending the meeting.
Well, the main question would be, how do you evaluate your political system today?
Can you repeat?
Where would you say Uzbekistan is today in terms of progress toward democracy, toward a political system in which people have basic freedoms and a rule of law and can choose and replace their leaders as they wish in free and fair elections.
Mm. Actually, there are so many problems, shortcomings in my country as well. But we in Uzbekistan, as Uzbek people, we mainly learn from Uzbek professors and Uzbek books. That's why we tend to get materials that mainly praise our democracy and politics. That's actually why we need some voice from outside our country to learn exactly about the democracy and compare our democracy with other countries. Actually, when I compare our politics and democracy from learning YouTube, from internet, there are so many shortcomings. Even we are actually going a little beyond in a race with some Central Asian countries, even Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, you know about Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's democracy is sometimes going further from Uzbekistan's. That's the one problem we must really deal with before we going in a competition outside the country, outside the Central Asia, as you said, Mongolia. Before we must compete very well with our neighboring countries. That's one thing we must really do. Before doing this, before starting initiatives for these activities, we must really teach our youth, our people, that we still lead a lot of progress in our democracy. They must know the truth, and they must really compare our country's democracy with real information with other countries.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with you. So I, I applaud you for pursuing that. When did you form your Alta Fakor team?
It has been about not 10 months. 10 months.
Mm.
We mainly work not offline, but we have also started working online about 3 months before. You know what? Uzbekistan mainly shows off and praises its history. We have Amir Temur, Alshir Nawai, lots of very great legends, but now we have to focus on our future and our current state, our present. That's why we need better democracy and experts like you from outside voice to improve, to really talk about explicitly about our progress.
Okay, well, I think it's remarkable that you're doing this, and you should you should draw on as many sources of knowledge and understanding as you can. And I assume your goal is to what? Continue to try and disseminate knowledge and understanding of democracy to the younger generation in Uzbekistan?
You know what, Professor? With our team, there is Mrazam also here. We are starting a research paper on YouTube to learn how some Uzbek videos can cause bias in our politics.
Hmm.
Some Uzbek bloggers just post very unfiltered videos and information on YouTube, and it's not mainly controlled by the government. We are going to observe the trends, observe the statistics, how this is affecting the concept of Uzbek people on democracy.
Mhm.
How do you think about it? Is
Yeah,
that good?
I think it's a very worthy and important project. Yeah, I would encourage you to pursue that. The government is not the only threat to the future of democracy in Uzbekistan.
Of course.
That
Thank you.
is the state and so on. It's also threatened by a variety of non-governmental actors who don't have democratic objectives or mentalities.
Of course. Thank you for conversation. I
Okay,
really appreciate your opinion. Thank you.
okay. Good luck to all of you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Professor.
Okay. Keep in touch. Bye bye.